In light of recent exploration work around NFT, I decided to finally apply for an OpenSea API Key. There are a couple key points along the way of the application process that I am going to bring up because they took me on this unexpected journey. In this video, allow me to share a second insight involving the AMP token. If you're curious about my first insight or discovery, check the prior video on this topic available in the link found in the description below. So jumping forward into the application process, there is a section that's called out here that, quote, please provide a signed message using your wallet address, including your email address and project name. You will need a non-zero amount of ETH in your wallet for approval. You may use the tools such as MyCrypto, which you can find here at app.mycrypto.com, end quote. So the second piece of the story is that you fill out the application and then there's this section. The surface level request is to simply provide signing that you are in possession of the Ethereum address that shows up on the screen. The recommended service for doing this is called mycrypto.com. Now, what's really peculiar about this is that if you go read up about mycrypto.com's team at mycrypto.com/about, you'll stumble on this tweet from their chief executive officer. The link to the podcast will be in the description below. So why is this peculiar? It's because it had me thinking about the AMP token. You may find it strange that a podcast about identity would have me thinking about the AMP token, but allow me to explain. You see, in light of the recent SEC filings against the AMP token, I've been searching, reading, and learning far and wide about the official institutions that power our financial system. For example, one of those is FinCEN.gov, who has published a rule set online about knowing your customer as part of well-regulated framework to reduce fraud in the payment space. In fact, after much reading, I'm now predicting FinCEN takes on cryptocurrencies within the next 10 years as what I consider a pretty safe bet. Consider this passage on who all FinCEN says they apply themselves to. Quote, who does FinCEN apply to? FinCEN has the challenge but important task of writing and coordinating the enforcement of anti-money laundering rules for more than 100,000 banks, credit unions, money services businesses, MSBs, insurance companies, security brokers, casinos, mutual funds, precious metal dealers, and other financial institutions, end quote. So the angle here is rather interesting. The chief executive officer behind MyCrypto is Taylor Monahan. Now, if you go looking for obvious connections between AMP or Flexa to Taylor Monahan, there just isn't a lot that shows up. Instead, I want to look at this forum from the perspective of the payment rails and identity, and when it comes to enforcing anti-money laundering rules of the system. The question is, where does AMP token fit into all of this at? In fact, if you go look up Flexa Network, you'll learn, as I have, that on the screen here is that Flexa Network is already a registered member of FinCEN. Now that is quite interesting because of this FinCEN framework that deals specifically with banks or financial institutions that smell like banks that I now have on the screen. Note that I am definitively not saying that Flexa is a bank, but I want to call attention to the CIP protocol of FinCEN here. As shown on the screen, FinCEN has a strongly written document encouraging financial institutions to more or less know their customers, which I have learned is called KYC as part of a CIP or customer identification program. It's not KFC. Now, the question that I wondered about in my head is where Flexa's AMP token really fits in with that as a settlement solution between parties. After all, how far do FinCEN rules reach into Flexa for KYC? On the screen here is a help article about KYC requirements that Flexa is attempting to play nice in because it's a payment solution provider. There are certain financial thresholds that, and I haven't quite got this far into the regulations, where Flexa would be required to do a full identity check. And here's what's kind of interesting about all of this. The AMP token sits in this weird state of being in multiple different categorical buckets all at the same time. For example, consider this FinCEN posting about when FinCEN regulations apply to users of virtual currencies. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So as a settlement or insurance contract to ensure that a transaction clears and to reduce fraud, FinCEN and AMP token actually make a lot of sense to work hand in hand. In fact, it made so much sense that I'd like to present a new Hopium Theory, and here it is. What if one of the results from further investigations into the AMP token is that regulated government institutions that are charged with the duty to serve to reduce fraud and reduce financial risk take a deep look at the mechanisms of the AMP token as an open source token as the primary solution, not just for some cryptocurrencies, but all cryptocurrency solutions. Meaning, from the perspective of the United States financial regulating body, the noted solution for solving risk in the crypto payment space is to ensure the AMP token is applied and used for every transaction. That it is an unlikely path, but there is one path where the financial regulating body of the US could take a look at the AMP token as a kind of requirement to ensure that cryptocurrency transactions meet this safety threshold. Now, sometimes it's not a government regulatory requirement, but one that's done by, say, a consortium or a retail organization at scale. meaning that in some scenarios, industry itself may draw up the best practices for reducing fraud and playing safely inside a sandbox of the FinCEN regulatory framework. There, too, the AMP token would be named as a best practice. So you see, there's more to unpack and understand when it comes to virtual currencies, settlement fraud solutions, AML, FinCEN, AMP token, Flexa, and so much more. But we're up for time today. Until next time, make waves, my friends.